Okay, I have to say thank you for your patience in waiting for me to gain the wherewithal this week to continue recording the third episode now of testimony regarding the horrors of my career at Amec Foster Wheeler in Kuwait. This is all context for the upcoming episode, I swear, about this book, Free the Map, with Henk van Houten, a Dutch academic. As always, I am providing context at the beginning of these episodes in the form of listening to former New York Times and now Al Jazeera journalist Fatima talking about the trauma of war from her time in Afghanistan. So let's listen to her testimony.
Dad, just 2 days ago, I had a panic attack and I couldn't move for 5 hours. This is what war does to people. Take your inner peace away, turn you to kind of a robot.
So as we've heard several times before, this is something that stuck with me after I listened to this podcast 3 months ago and made me realize that I had something to say as well. Then we are moving on to J.D. Vance, US Vice President's invitation to speak up. Now, I have something to say in response to a comment on Substack from Tom. He believed that my use of these quotes from J.D. Vance is an endorsement of his political platform. This is incorrect. In fact, by using this quote from J.D. Vance in this context, I am engaging in subterfuge. Let's listen to what he has to say.
To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you.
Yes, so I definitely have some views that differ from the leadership that I had as an employee of Amec Foster Wheeler in Kuwait, and more broadly, the leadership of NBTC, a manpower company that is a subject of this episode, and also the leadership of the Kuwait Oil Company, by extension, the government of Kuwait and the royal family, unfortunately, given the power it has over the state of Kuwait. A key passage from or phrase from what J.D. Vance said there is that if we do not believe in the wisdom of the people and provide a democracy within which they can enjoy their lives, then very little will be accomplished. And let me tell you, that is a operative concept in this episode, because very little has been accomplished by the manpower company NBTC on the topic of safety at its work sites and preserving the lives of its staff. And that goes also for the project management consultancies running projects in the oil field on behalf of the Kuwait Oil Company, the Kuwait Oil Company itself, and others, as I said. So why is that, you might be wondering? Well, let's go to a New York Times article from a 12th of June, 2024. I will just start reading it out. The title is "Fire in Kuwait, Worker Housing Leaves at least 49 Dead." It was after spending a week this week wondering how on earth I'm going to tell you guys this story and dealing with the fear of what the blowback might be. What finally pushed me across the line was coming across this case. Because what it is a case of 49 unnecessary deaths in worker housing maintained by manpower company NBTC, when I have a case of there in 2017 covering up someone blowing the whistle about gas poisoning, in this case H2S gas poisoning, and they're covering up that case. And then 8 years later, 49 people dying inhaling gases from a burning building. Let's read the article. At least 49 people were killed and dozens of others injured in the Persian Gulf country of Kuwait, the state news agency said, when a fire broke out on Wednesday in a building that housed scores of low-income workers, many of them Indian nationals. The fire began during the morning in a coastal area called Mangaf, about half an hour's drive from the center of the capital, Kuwait City. The Kuwaiti authorities have held the building owner for questioning as they investigate the cause of the fire and try to determine whether any shortcoming or neglect played a role, the state news agency reported. The authorities promised to begin a campaign to tackle building code violations. The public prosecutor's office also planned to inspect the site and interview survivors. Speaking to journalists at the site of the fire, Sheikh Fahad Yusuf Al-Sabah, Kuwait's Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister, blamed the greed of property owners for the disaster and said that the owner of the company employing the workers, NBTC, would also be detained, the Reuters news agency and Kuwaiti newspapers reported. Jayashankar, an Indian salesman who survived the fire, said that he awoke to screams around 4 a.m. local time. He and his roommates opened the door to their fourth-floor apartment and found that thick black smoke had enveloped the corridor, burning their lungs, he said in a phone interview, asking to be identified by his first name only for fear of retribution. A fear, by the way, that has also given me pause this week before I chose to continue speaking up. Instead of trying to escape, he said, they locked the door, opened a window, and waited for help. 2 of his roommates, who left the apartment to find an exit later, died, he said. All right, so it goes on. But suffice to say, even the Indian Prime Minister weighed in on this matter, given that so many of his countrymen died. So why am I motivated by this news article? Well, as I said, this was worker accommodation for largely Indian employees of a company called NBTC. They employed an assistant electrician at the time that I was working for Amec Foster Wheeler in Kuwait in 2017. This man had this to say in an email to Amec Foster Wheeler, Kuwait Oil Company, Petrofac, and other staff, because he was mistreated when he raised the alarm about H2S gas poisoning and his being fired as a result of that. So I'll pause now whilst I provide a recording from an earlier time, and you can see at the end of that recording the impact that that had on me. Respected sir, my name is and I'm an employee of NBTC, a subcontractor to Petrofac, Kuwait, for the client KOC Project EF 1928. And my civil ID number is, and then he writes it down, working as assistant electrician for E&I department, brackets P250, brackets. I wish to bring to your attention the injustice happening to me after the gas leak incident at our KOC project site, Gathering Center 30, main manifold. I am one of the victim of that gas leakage wherein 5 gas-affected people were hospitalized and sent to the hospital in serious bad health condition. After that incident, I was removed from the site and sent to HO for termination of the job and forced to exit, as they put a charge against me for highlighting this incident by asking for ambulance to take the affected people for medical aid. I wish to know that is it a crime or against any law to ask for medical aid like ambulance in case of serious emergencies? We are always discouraged to report incidents. If we report any small or big incident, then we are treated as against the company. The recruitment agency compelled us to pay a huge amount to join NBTC Kuwait. Now, it has been only 4 months I joined, and I am being terminated without any reason, without any notice. I am mentally tortured by the NBTC management. I wish to know what mistake I did by asking for help to protect my and my colleague's life in emergency. The doctor confirmed our poor health in the Jara hospital. Please see the medical report attached. By the way, I have that too. I am disappointed by the NBTC's management as they are not telling me the investigation report of the gas leak incident and are terminating me for no mistake, no written termination letter, and no reason at all. I am requesting Petrofac, Kuwait, Amec Foster Wheeler Kuwait, and KOC, or Kuwait Oil Company in Kuwait, to kindly help me as I have great faith in KOC health and safety management system. I do not blame anybody. Maybe it's against the management rule to report incidents or ask for help in case of emergency, so I want everything in writing. Generally, if employee resign, they need to give 3 months notice period, and if company terminate, then company gives 3 months notice before removing from job. I requested NBTC to do justice to me, but no use. I am hoping from KSC to get justice, as I have no other option and am expecting help from KSC too. I am seeking help from local authorities to help me get justice. Please do the needful. I will be very thankful to all of you for helping this worker. Thank you and regards. And then he provides his own NBTC employee number, calls himself an assistant electrician in the E&I department of NBTC, P-250, working on KEC project EF 1928 in the North Kuwait Asset. It's all written there. Okay, so we're back. You now see that there was a chance for NBTC and all of the other organizations that this man contacted to cause a significant change in the way that workers were responded to who raised the alarm about safety issues in the oil field. This was a man who said that he followed procedures and was just overall did what anyone did when there was an emergency. He called the ambulance because he was suffering gas poisoning along with others and was taken to the hospital. I mean, should it seriously be proposed that someone should not call the ambulance when they're suffocating because they've inhaled H2S gas? I don't think so. And further, should someone, in a underhanded way be fired for having done that? To advance such a thing is, surely to be cast from society. But what this man has put before us is that is his and others' lot. That's similar to what that New York Times article said. Safety breaches and violations are common. And if this organization had responded properly to this report, then there's a chance that 8 years later, well, actually it's 7 years later because this happened in 2024, that 7 years later, because of a proper response and a change to procedures in an organization, such that safety standards increased and people felt safe to speak up about safety breaches, if that proper response had occurred, then I put it to you that this kind of a fire and these kind of deaths would not have happened, or that at least because these workers were empowered to speak up and that there was a attitude truly about proper worker safety within NBTC and more broadly the companies on top of NBTC that run the work sites that they provide workers for, such as Amec Foster Wheeler and the other PMCs and the Kuwait Oil Company, that if those entities provided the right atmosphere where it was okay to speak up about safety violations, potential safety breaches, in response to this man sending this email, that the conditions for a fire killing 49 people would be much harder to create. And yet here we are. This man was, soon after that email was sent, through a contact that I had in the Kuwait royal family, Bibi Nasser, who's from the Al Sabah family, she was able to tell me, using her contacts in the Kuwait Department of Immigration, was able to tell me that within 3 weeks of that man being fired and sending that email protesting having been fired, he left Kuwait. What I did everything I could to bring justice for this man when his email was forwarded to me by a member of Amec Foster Wheeler's safety staff. Amongst the things that I did, of course, was immediately to email him, because I thought there was a chance that I might be able to do something by causing enough shame to the management at Amec Foster Wheeler, and through my contacts in the Kuwait Oil Company, and of course through my connection with Bibi Nasser, to use the political power that I had to cause shame such that this man at least would not bear the financial consequences of going back to India and having to use the very small salary he could get there as an assistant electrician to pay off the recruitment company debt that he incurred, and that so many other Indians incur when they go from India to Kuwait, that he mentioned in his email. At least I had the idea that, perhaps we could do the rounds of the office, for example, to get together the small amount of money for us, Westerners particularly, that it would be to pay off that debt. That was one idea I had. But I will tell you, a haunting aspect of this experience for me is that despite this event being important enough for this man to take the risk whilst he was still in the country to email all of these powerful people and organizations, despite him taking that step, when it came the time that somebody, me, actually responded to him, I never got a response back from him. I sent an email from my Amec Foster Wheeler address. When I didn't get a response, thinking that maybe he felt it was too risky to respond to someone, I sent an email from my personal address. Still, he did not respond to me. Now, you are aware from previous episodes that there is a history of suicide of Indian staff members on projects, both someone hanging himself from a pipe rack on a gathering center and someone killing himself in his apartment. I'm sorry to keep bringing up these suicides for you. I don't blame you if you're not listening anymore because of that. But for those who still are, thank you. And what can I say? I'll try and make good use of your time through my frank, open, honest testimony. So, of course, you will understand what crossed my mind. That because this man was fired under some such circumstances and confronted such an incredible debt, and that the employment prospects in India and salary prospects were so low that that debt would be incredibly difficult to repay, and that he probably went back to India experiencing a great deal of shame after having only 4 months earlier left India to go to Kuwait, probably with a feeling of elation that he had made it in life and he was going to earn the big bucks after repaying the debt to the recruitment company, using his, by comparison to India, higher salary in Kuwait, that he went back under a totally different circumstances with the shame of having been fired and a big debt. I was left wondering, given this man didn't respond to my emails, that he may have killed himself as well. Now you can imagine the crisis that this caused for me. But of course, it has to be said, it is by comparison nothing compared to what this man went through. Nevertheless, motivated by my sense of justice and, believe it or not, identification with him, I did several things. So you were introduced to Nasser, this friend of mine who accompanied me on a trip in this ridiculous Mustang GT to verify the circumstances around the man who died on this ridiculous road accident on this perfectly straight flat desert road. On the same trip, at around 6:30 p.m. at night on Highway 80, we visited NBTC Camp 1 in North Kuwait. I will show you it in Google Earth Engine. So this is a trusty old Google Earth Engine again, and we have our time slider up the top, and I'm showing 2017 imagery. So you will recall that we visited GC31 earlier in the day, and went to this stretch of road where we were very surprised to know that somebody died driving on it. Then we went to NBTC Worker Camp 1 in North Kuwait, because I happened to find it at the time in Google Maps. And I thought, well, given that I have this letter or email from this man, and he was a NBTC worker, why don't I go to this camp to see if they have any records of his having stayed there whilst working nearby on GC31. So we drove in, and you can see there's the place mark says here, but it's actually here that we drove in because that's also part of the camp. And I remember that we parked the car here, and it was 6:30 p.m. at night. As I said, there were plenty of men milling about, you know, just socializing out on this open expanse of dirt here. But here was the camp office. So we were quickly sort of taken there when we walked in. We must have been quite a sight turning up in this ridiculous car and then walking in, you know, this Kuwaiti and this white man asking to speak to the management. So the camp manager at the desk, you know, I said to him, we're trying to find out about when the last time was that this individual stayed at your camp. And he dutifully, you know, I didn't even have to show my ID or anything. You know, having a Kuwaiti with you does wonders, let me tell you. And maybe also the color of my skin, let's be honest. Anyway, so he dutifully started going through all the records, and he couldn't find any mention of this individual's name. He also was good enough to call other camps around. They also couldn't find any mention. But what this man also did was walked me through in the dark, the sort of through the passages and corridors, you know, of this camp, and took me to the door of the camp manager. And he was this heavy-set Indian man who was already sort of in his own private quarters, getting ready for the night, really. And this man came with us back to the camp office, and we got talking about why I was there. And I mentioned that there was this gas poisoning, and that we were trying to find or verify this man's story. And his response was, "Oh, the gas poisoning case." And if I recall correctly, actually, I personally didn't mention the gas poisoning, or it was that, the words came out of his mouth without prompting me. So what I'm trying to say is that this gas poisoning event was known to this camp manager and more broadly these people at this camp, right? So word had gotten out. It wasn't as though I had some idea in my head or that this worker who sent this email had been making up a story. Oh no. It was known such that this man spontaneously said to me, "Oh, the gas poisoning case." And then, because there were things that were happening in the office and I had someone else in front of me and he was going through the records, my attention went from this camp manager back to the man at the desk. And I think we were looking through the records again. Anyway, by the time my attention went back to, I was thinking about, I thought to talk with the camp manager again. Suspiciously, this man had made himself scarce and left the room. Okay. Now I would just say that you can make your own conclusions about what that says, right? Okay, so having failed to really come up with any records about this man having, stayed in the camp overnight, I also recall though that what the camp, the front office guy was saying to me was that it's possible he was staying in NBTC quarters down in Mangaf, right? And now, I never ever visited that, but now we know from this news story about, this building here, NBTC Camp 4, you can see, and from the Google Earth reviews, and there are some photos of the burnt building, and also there we go. There's some photos of the burnt building, and also we saw the same photos in the New York Times article. So what can I say here? Right. So it's just such a telling and shocking turn of events that, this man effectively, his report was a canary in a coal mine, or if all of its messaging had fully been heeded, then there might have been a transformation just in response to that one line from him, that workers are told not to speak up, that the organization comes down on employees who speak up. If that single sentence was responded to as in the way that it should have been, with the result being that, to stretch things a bit too much here, but to heed what J.D. Vance and Pope John Paul II were saying, that we should trust the wisdom of those who speak up. And through that, we will achieve great things. If that had happened in response to this man speaking up, then surely it has to be said that the chances for a mismanaged worker accommodation facility would have been lower, and those deaths would have been fewer, or that event would not have happened at all. And yet that did not happen. So let me continue the story. So after Nasser and I had made that visit to NBTC Camp 1 on Highway 80, we went home. And that sort of concluded our efforts, with these two safety incidents in terms of our investigations in the oil field. And what did I do in the office? So the most logical way to continue the story here is that bear in mind that I was serving out my 3-month notice period at Amec Foster Wheeler after Connor O'Neill, the operations director, gave me an invitation to leave Kuwait immediately and not serve out my notice, and I refused, so that I could continue my investigations, which he very well knew I would do. But nevertheless, he was probably afraid to push me further, afraid of what I would do, given that I had already emailed the CEO, John Lewis, in London, about why I had resigned. Perhaps he didn't want to push me, wondering what would I do next. Okay, I don't know, but I have to say that suspicion was in my mind. So here I am, serving out my notice, having submitted 6 ethics reports in Ethics Point about the cases that the senior safety engineer had described to me during the Eid break at my desk at, I think it was B05 was the desk that I had in actually Block B. I had confused it before as Block A, Block B in the Altamira Annex. So I'd used his testimony as the basis for these 6 ethics reports. So because I'd put my name on all of them, it was, and that the global compliance officer, James Walker, had responded by commencing an investigation himself, the management of the Amec Foster Wheeler branch in Kuwait very well knew that I had submitted those reports and had triggered that investigation. Very well knew. So what was one of the things in that context, knowing that I'd submitted all these ethics reports about safety breaches in the North Kuwait Asset, what did a member of the management do to me? Well, Aki Mahmoud, the operations manager, who sat in a corner office, the southwest, excuse me, let me orient myself. It would have been, yes, the southwest corner of the office in A block of the Altamira Annex. Aki Mahmoud came to me and asked me to produce a spatiotemporal animation, a map animation of the progress of construction for these very North Kuwait Asset projects where I had taken the risk of submitting these ethics point reports about various horrific safety breaches and unnecessary deaths on these projects. Yes, Aki Mahmoud, knowing in his capacity as an operations manager, knowing my horror at this state of affairs, nevertheless came to me during my notice period and asked me to produce a spatiotemporal animation of the progress of works on these projects, ignoring all of these safety issues. Indeed, in doing so, Aki Mahmoud used me for sport. He said, "Fuck you for all of these horrors that you have witnessed and reported on. Fuck you. I'm going to use you now. I'm going to rub your nose in it, and I'm going to make you change your work from your usual project about EF 1784, a soil remediation project in South and East Kuwait, an entirely different asset. I'm going to make you, for the first time in the 4.5 years you've been working at this company, in this country, on this project, I'm now going to make you create a map animation of the progress of works as though nothing else is happening and requires effort or attention on these very projects where you've submitted ethics point reports about safety breaches." So this motherfucker came to me in this context and asked me to do this. And of course, what I did was I delayed for 3 weeks. He came to me several times on my desk asking for updates, and other Indian staff, planning staff, who didn't know how to produce this kind of a map animation, or didn't have the motivation to look anywhere globally within this company of 30,000 people around the world. No, chose specifically to come to me, the very person who'd reported about all these incidents, to make this animation. Eventually, it got to the point where it was in the last week, I think, of me serving out my notice period. And I went to Aki Mahmood's desk and with a printout of this assistant electrician from NBTC's email. And I put it on Aki's desk and I said to him, I refuse to make this map animation because of this testimony from this worker. What did Aki Mahmood respond with? He responded with a cynical, dismissive laugh, a sneer, and the remark that, you can do that if you believe it. So Aki Mahmood, in his capacity as an operations manager, second in command below Connor O'Neill, the operations director in this godforsaken fucking office at Amec Foster Wheeler, all he had to say to me, as someone providing credible evidence of an abuse of a worker to the extent that he'd been sent back to India with a debt that would take years for him to repay with the pitiful salaries in India, a debt to a recruitment firm who had sent him to Kuwait 4 months earlier. All Aki Mahmood had to say to me was to dismiss it with a sneering laugh. Now, this email from this worker came with several attachments. They were the hospital records verifying that there were elevated in his blood results on the variables that are monitored. There was elevated concentrations of substances that are measured on these blood tests, verifying his claim that he arrived at that hospital suffering gas poisoning. Okay? Did Aki review those results? No. Did he ask me for the attachment to that email to check that the claims that this individual had made were true? No. Aki basically scrunched up that printout and put it in the bin. He might as well have done that in my face. I have fed the hospital records into Google Gemini and also ChatGPT. I will read you some of the things that it said. So this is ChatGPT. The document appears to be a medical report or prescription written in Arabic with some English medical terms. The handwriting is somewhat difficult to read, but I can attempt to extract and interpret key details. Here's a rough breakdown. Patient information. It gives some summaries of, some date of birth, occupation, gender, nationality, name. These are irrelevant. Medical examination. History and physical examination. DC cut, which is possibly a meaning discharge good. X-ray and investigations, ZFP-29, unclear what this means. Diagnosis, here's the key one. UO followed by something like plum inhalic of toxic gas, which might refer to pulmonary inhalation of toxic gas or fume inhalation. So the reason I put it into ChatGPT is, as with all doctors, the handwriting is incredibly difficult to decipher. And it's fascinating, actually, the capacity of ChatGPT to do that deciphering. Continuing on with treatment given. So ChatGPT says some notes that mention oxygen and possible medication. IV, DT, and O2 HUSP. This could indicate IV fluids, diphtheria, toxoid, and oxygen therapy at a hospital. Does this sound like someone who wasn't suffering from H2S gas inhalation? I mean, if that's what the hospital record says, to me, it's kind of verifying what this man emailed us all about. It also says that vitals were taken like blood pressure and things like that. And then there's a doctor's signature. I will not read that out. So what else did we discover from Google Gemini? Let me try and find. So I don't have the pro version of ChatGPT, so you only get one deciphering of an image every 24 hours. So I put the rest, though, into Gemini, and it came back with several interesting things. So one of them was, because there was also a receipt of the blood gas analysis results for this individual. And Gemini provides the following breakdown. Again, there are patient details, which I won't read off. Test results: temperature 37 degrees, pH 7.294, slightly acidic. So Gemini offers interpretations as we go along, which is really useful. PCO2 57.4 mmHg. I don't know what those units are, but Gemini says elevated, indicating respiratory acidosis. PO2 is 21 mmHg, which is significantly low, indicating severe hypoxemia. BEECF 1 mmol/L. I am really not a doctor. Base excess and slightly elevated, says Gemini. Then HCO3 is 27.8 mmol/L. And Gemini says this is bicarbonate and slightly elevated. And then the next one is TCO2, which is 30 mmol/L. Gemini says that's total carbon dioxide and slightly elevated. Next one is SO2, which is 29%, and Gemini said that's very low oxygen saturation. The last one is LAC, which is 0.73 mmol/L or per liter, and Gemini says that's lactate and within the normal range. Then there's some other information later on. The first one I will just read out: stat CG4+, and Gemini said that indicates a stat urgent blood gas test. So what can we say here? This man turned up with, according to the admission sheets, evidence of gas inhalation, or at least claiming that. And then there was a request for an urgent blood gas test, and the results verifying that there was something wrong with his respiratory system. So then Gemini goes on to provide an interpretation. The blood gas results indicate acute respiratory acidosis with severe hypoxemia. This means the patient's lungs are not effectively removing carbon dioxide, leading to an acidic blood pH. The extremely low PO2 and SO2 indicate a critical lack of oxygen in the blood. No wonder this man, and he claims 4 others, were sent by ambulance to Jara Hospital. To me, this is perfectly straightforward validation of the H2S gas sensor going off. His dutifully raising the alarm, evacuating 160 plus from site, and the one severely affected, him and 4 others, going to Jara Hospital in an ambulance. So what did I observe, to reiterate? Well, initially, this senior safety engineer, when he came during Eid to my desk, BH or B05 at least, something like that, in B block in the Altumir Annex. Initially, he came to my desk because word had gotten round for why I had resigned. And his attitude initially was to say, the approach he took to communicating about this gas poisoning case was that this individual was a troublemaker. But the look on my face showed him that I didn't necessarily share this view. And interestingly, he, coming to understand that I didn't have the usual dehumanizing and cavalier attitude towards these staff and the plight of them, he spent the next 2 hours detailing at my desk this and several other safety cases, and came back a few days later to provide more detail. So we went with that particular individual, with my standing up for what was right, a change in attitude, and providing significant detail about several other safety cases. The other individual that I profiled already, Achi Mahmoud, this operations manager, What did we see in response to this case? Well, it certainly wasn't to understand in detail, as I have provided to you, what went on for this man with the evidence he provided about the circumstances of his hospital admission. Indeed, it was, I put it to you, to use me for sport, to victimize me, in fact, for standing up for what was right, by making me do work precisely on the projects that had caused me so much grave concern. And then, when I went to his desk with this email from this worker to tell him that of my basis for refusing to do this work on the progress of construction on these projects, what happened to me the next day? Well, I got an email from Sonam Fleming, the HR manager in Kuwait for Amec Foster Wheeler, saying to me that the project had determined that I was no longer of use or doing work that was useful to the project. She didn't specify which project. And she said that therefore I was no longer needed in the office, and on receipt of that email should leave immediately. What happened next was that within a couple of minutes of receiving that email, Connor O'Neill walked to my desk, the operations director, and said, "Have you received this email?" I was working on something else at the time. I barely had understood really, what it said. I think I sort of cast my eye over it. I hadn't really actually perceived that there was an instruction to leave the office immediately. Such that, I was lacking that understanding of the email so much that I actually, just to continue, so Connor then asked me to stand up, get my valuables from my desk, and to walk out of the office front door with him and never come back. That was my end of my service for Amec Foster Wheeler in Kuwait. And then, as I said, I was a bit confused about that email. So when I got home, because I'd lost all access to the systems, I asked Sonam Fleming to send an email, to forward that email to my personal account. And I got it. And that's when I read, and fully understood what had happened. So, because on a project that I was not employed for at Amec Foster Wheeler, during my notice period caused by safety breaches on these projects in North Kuwait, because I was not being useful, according to them, on that project that they had decided to victimize me about having spoken up to do with. I'm not being terribly coherent here, but because they realized that they really weren't maybe being successful victimizing me for having spoken up about the safety breaches there. Because I refused to do that work, they sent an email to me saying, the project doesn't believe you are being useful anymore. By the way, this was a project that I'd never spent any time working on. I spent 4.5 years working on another project. They decided to kick me out of the office. And it was I only had 3 days left to serve out my 3 months anyway. So I was fine with it because, the less time working there, the better for me. But it was just a remarkable way for things to conclude, and a further endorsement of the view that, to put it provocatively, things were not proceeding in the manner J.D. Vance advocates, where in a democracy, we are the stronger for everyone having the chance to speak up, and we shall achieve a lot by not being afraid of what regular people say, including speaking up about things going wrong. JD Vance says, if we do not permit those circumstances, we do not permit others to speak up, we will achieve very little. Indeed, with this New York Times reporting, about 49 NBTC workers dying of gas inhalation again last year. Very little was achieved by NBTC, Amec Foster Wheeler, Petrofac, and the Kuwait Oil Company in preserving the lives of workers, because if only they had listened to the testimony of this individual and my efforts to advocate on his behalf in 2017, they would have stood a far greater chance of avoiding those deaths, because that worker came to them with evidence of mishandling of a gas inhalation case, to the degree that this man was packed off back home with a debt to the recruitment company, and in my view, providing circumstances under which he may have found himself with the only remaining option to commit suicide. I think I didn't know that I would speak for so long, but now that I have gotten into it, it's been a long time coming. I have held these things within me for years. I have suffered a lack of sleep for years. It only really ended 2020, the lack of sleep, the nightmares, the rage, when I began to see that the stock price of this company was dropping significantly. And that leads us into the concluding episode, the next one. And I'll have to end things there as well, because the wife and daughter are coming home.